Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Jeanette McMillian, Assistant Director, Supply Chain and Cyber Directorate, NCSC. First, a message from our sponsor, Moody's. Now, please welcome INSA Vice President John Doyen.
Good morning and welcome to our program. This morning, we're pleased to host one of our community's top leaders for a timely discussion around supply chain security. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. We have over 350 registrants for today's program, so I'll do my best to get to all of your questions. And we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call. This is a reminder that this program is on the record and being recorded. And finally, I'd like to thank our host sponsor, Moody's, for their support of this program. We could not deliver this kind of thought leadership without the support of our sponsor partners. Here to introduce our speaker this morning is David Snepp, Senior Director, Defense, Intelligence, and Law Enforcement at Moody's. David, over to you.
Hey, John, it's so good to see you again this morning. We had lunch last month and really appreciated meeting you. Thanks to INSA for keeping us all on the forefront of some very critical topics out there. Just really appreciate the organization. Just a word about Moody's for everybody.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you need to click a button that says, accept my webcam, so we get you on the screen here. We don't see you right now.
How's that, John?
Perfect.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And John, thank you. It's great to see you again. We had lunch last month, and I just want to say that we really appreciate INSA keeping us all very well informed on some very critical topics, and we just really appreciate that here at Moody's. Just a word about our company. We are 115 years old. Last month, FBI Director Ray said at your breakfast that the FBI was 115 years old, so we have something very in common. Many here on this call today probably think of Moody's as a ratings agency, and while that's very true, we're one of the world's top ratings agencies. We also have 14,000 employees across the globe that deliver comprehensive insight on what we call exponential risks, including those on supply chains. We provide incredibly deep and rich data, expert analysis, and robust tools. Relevant to today's discussion, we're helping counterintelligence analysts identify risks and vulnerabilities in very complex supply chains to uncover and trace hidden company ownership and shell companies connected to our adversaries and illicit actors. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our great speaker. I'm excited about this because last year during the construction of a white paper, I quoted Jeanette McMillian, so I'm really happy to be able to introduce her today. Jeanette serves as the Assistant Director of the Supply Chain and Cyber Directorate of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. In this role, she participates in interagency strategic programs and NSC initiatives to bolster the security of cyber and supply chains across the federal enterprise. Jeanette works closely with NCSC directorates, OD&I components, and other departments and agencies, especially the Department of Homeland Security and Defense, to address supply chain security as a critical component of the national counterintelligence security and national cyber strategy. So I've been looking forward to this. Moody's has been looking forward to this, and I'll turn it over to Jeanette. Good morning, Jeanette.
Good morning, David, and good morning, John. Thank you so much for having me, and it was wonderful. That was an awesome introduction, and awesome to be here with you during National April, which is the National Supply Chain Integrity Month. So I'm just so grateful just to be here.
Happy Supply Chain Integrity Month to you, Jeanette. We're so glad you could join us. And hey, let's launch right into our discussion that we're planning to have today. And we'll start with Supply Chain Integrity Month. So it's been 5 years now. This program was launched in 2019. Can you talk a little bit about the last 5 years, the evolution of this campaign, and also the genesis of this year's focus, which is on acquisition, cyber, and enterprise security?
Yes, no, again, thank you so much for hosting. And again, we couldn't think of a better way to start than with a little coffee and conversation on one of my topics that's near and dear to me, which is supply chain security. Yes. And to quote a line from the Netflix show Stranger Things, mornings are for coffee and contemplation. So happy to contemplate on a few of our supply chain integrity month issues. And John, as you had said before, yes, we started this probably about 5 years ago, really thinking about how we can build and bring awareness to supply chain. And here at NCSC, the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, not to be confused with the UK's NCSC, they're doing some great work out there over in the UK as well. But it all started to really bring light to a different perspective on the threats to the national security from foreign adversaries. Every 3 years, Congress gives NCSC a little homework, and we're required to report to Congress on the top foreign intelligence threats facing our country. In 2020, the then NCSC director, Bill Evanina, marked a paradigm shift in our CI strategy by focusing on the areas most targeted by foreign nation state threat actors. While past counterintelligence strategies, national strategies characterized and categorized the threats by our top foreign nation state adversaries. And I'm pretty sure everyone on the online can understand who those are: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. But that wasn't necessarily the focus of this new strategy and this new paradigm shift. We wanted to focus on the areas, not the who, but the why and the what those foreign adversaries were targeting. And once again, we looked at those things from a CI and security perspective and came up with what we're looking at right now, which is critical infrastructure, key U.S. supply chains, U.S. economy, American democratic institutions, and cyber and technical operations. 4 years later, we continue to see this trend, which is why we in the National Counterintelligence and Security Center believe that this is something we need to focus on. My area, obviously being the Assistant Director for Supply Chains and Cyber, that's been my focus, and that's why we come together every April to kind of raise awareness. But one of those things that we wanted to do was take a look, even though the threat has increased over that 4-year period, 5-year period, one of the things we did recognize is that those organizations that were able to build with their supply chain risk management programs, acquisition security principles, in terms of bringing those things into their procurement process, going beyond just cost, schedule, and performance. Those that incorporated cybersecurity into their due diligence checks when they're working with different companies, bringing folks in from a merger and an acquisition. Where's that cybersecurity sense? And then also those that incorporated enterprise security. So acquisition, cyber, and enterprise security led us to ACE. Let's play the ACE card here, because one of the things we want to do, especially on that enterprise level, is making sure that all those organizational units are talking to one another, that the HR person is talking to the logistics person is talking to cyber, legal and policy are both talking to each other, and more importantly, everyone is getting this information up to the C-suite so that they can make the best decision for their organization, whether in their industry, in terms of their market share, whether they're in government, in towards their mission. They definitely want to make sure that they're including supply chain risk as part of that overall risk calculus. So came up with ACE. ACE, you need an ACE to play against the card, play your ACE card when the stakes are this high. And that's exactly why we came up with the theme this year.
Great. Well, you mentioned, the last assessment you did was a paradigm shift, is what I heard you say. And I'm just thinking, even in the last couple of years, technology doesn't stand still, right? So you have all these emerging technologies, especially explosion with AI and generative AI. So how do these emerging technologies present, unique challenges to maintaining supply chain integrity, and what are you doing to address those challenges?
Yeah, no, great question, John. And I think that's one of the areas that we needed to focus on. When someone says supply chains, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And the thing that I needed to do from our leadership here in the counterintelligence and community, intelligence and security community, was figure out what we needed to do to get the message out. So granted, yes, we want to make sure that all supply chains are secure and that goods and services are being delivered promptly and in a timely manner, and that we can rely and count upon it, right? That we have confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all of our supply chains. But that's a really broad remit. So one of the things that we wanted to take a look at is in the emerging technology sector, where are those technologies that we know we need to maintain or regain our absolute advantage over our adversary? So in 2021, NCSC also did a little look-see at those emerging technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 5 critical technologies that we began to focus on. Obviously, semiconductors, they are in absolutely everything. Autonomous vehicles, bioeconomy, AI, quantum. Those were the areas that we felt we definitely needed to look at. But this wasn't we weren't the only ones voting on this. You know who else voted? The PRC. So the People's Republic of China also voted in terms of what they felt were their most critical supply chains, technologies, and then worked backwards into the supply chain to achieve those technological things. They introduced something back in 2015 that they like to call military civil fusion strategy. And that particular doctrine was codified in 2015, and that became their official military strategy, meaning that anything that would advance both military as well as civil technologies, that they were going to go for it, and they were going to go all in. And that's why our stakes have been so high with regards to these particular technologies. Because of that focus, U.S. businesses and their particular caught in the crosshairs with regards to the technologies that they need to advance their own mission and their own priorities here in the U.S., but they're also being targeted for their intellectual property, their data, and those technologies to advance the PRC. So given these strategic intentions and the unique opportunities and challenges posed by emerging technologies and the global supply chains that support each one of them, no one technology is indigenous to one specific country. So that's why we take a look at those ecosystems. We selected those technological sectors for outreach and support. Again, we believe that that's where the stakes are greatest potential from a U.S. economic perspective, as well as a national security perspective. So because these sectors produce technologies that may determine whether America remains the world's leading superpower or is eclipsed by strategic competitors in the next few years.
Great. Hey, we'll probably dig into some of these technologies because we're getting questions. By the way, we do want to hear from you. Give your questions, and we're getting some specific ones here about some different technologies. But I want to go back to the top. So this year's focus is on acquisition, cyber, enterprise security. So I want to get to the acquisition piece. And I saw just last month there was an announcement that Office of Management Budget was establishing a pilot to get to this acquisition question. And what the pilot was going to do was to better leverage federal acquisition to try to strengthen supply chains. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. Is OD&I or IC components participating in that? And can you tell us a little bit more about that and the goals?
I'm assuming you're meaning the OMB's project for the PP or EPP product for critical materials and in products. Right. Is that great? No, that's an absolutely great initiative. And while we're not specifically my area in NCSC, we're not specifically connected to it, it does signal one of the hallmarks that we found with regards to increasing diversity. And one of the things that we can do is definitely increase diversity of domestic supply chains. So I believe that pilot program was probably set out in March, probably early March, late March timeframe. But it's really one of those areas where you can take a look at, if you're going to have geopolitical tensions in the world, there's going to be natural disasters. I think, just the earthquake in Taiwan, the unfortunate bridge accident with regards to the Key Bridge. All of those things are going to absolutely frustrate supply chains, even in the best of conditions, right? So I think that was one of the areas where this specific program was to say, hey, from a federal perspective, those suppliers and those domestic communicators that are saying, hey, I'm going to build my sources and my materials here with at least 50 to 60% of materials that are here in the US. What a great way to make sure that your supply chain is secure. What a great way to bring and build back into the economic security of our own nation, but more importantly, to prevent nation states from having any sort of governance over the supply chain or any part of it, so that you can deliver goods and services to the federal government. It's one of those areas where we can say, with the power of the federal purse, we want to make sure that we're supporting our domestic supply chains first. And it builds economics as well as national security for the ability to have the confidence in those products, to have the integrity in those products, and more importantly, to make sure that they are available when the government needs them. So that's a great program, and the increased prices are certainly an incentive for industry, but it's definitely one of those things that the OMB is piloting, and we're looking forward to seeing some successes out of that program.
It sounds really good, and I'm curious, are there, beyond this pilot program, are there some other examples you might have of collaboration between government and industry, trying to address some of these supply chain integrity issues?
Yes, no, we definitely, again, like we said, we can't do this alone, especially when a lot of our critical infrastructure, 80 to 90% of it, to be honest, is owned by private partnerships, private sector organizations. We must do things together. And that's where I think this program, while it's great on the acquisition and in the economic part of it, that's really the heart and crux of it, the collaborative examples that we've actually been participating in are certainly more along the national security, enterprise security, trying to bring information to organizations. One of the best ones that we can point to is, again, I said semiconductors was one of our critical technologies that NCSC was like, hey, we really need to make sure that that particular industry understands the impact of their technology, as well as the global posture that each one of these corporations is under. CHIPS Act is certainly something that is helping with bringing back some of that domestic capability, bringing back that manufacturing here in the United States. So that's certainly been something where we said, yes, that's obviously an area that we need to continue to partner with. I think Department of Commerce is set up the CHIPS program office. They've been doing a wonderful job of making sure that they're getting industry involved and getting that grant money out. Again, the United States produces less than 10% of the world's chips, and going forward with any of the technologies that we're going to need to keep that technological advantage, having those chips here made and again assuring that that supply chain is ready to go when we need it is going to be absolutely wonderful. So I know that they're busy over there making sure that that supply chain is protected. Another area we've also seen is NSA's creation of the Cybersecurity Supply Collaboration Center, the CCC. That's another area where NSA has certainly been collaborating with industry for their specific needs when it comes to cybersecurity, and focusing more on the small and medium-sized businesses, where we've seen a lot of cybersecurity breaches and violations and exploits that have gotten and led to other more up the chain in terms of supply chain breaches and exploits. One of the things that we're looking at now in terms of trends is certainly the file transfer softwares. I think that people have heard more about Move It transfer software, those sorts of things. Small and medium businesses are using those things every day. Are they now opening themselves up and opening up their supply chain and their data to exploits that they did not envision? So the CDC and NSA working in collaboration with cybersecurity is absolutely great. And one of the other ones that has been around almost as long as Supply Chain Month is DHS's IT SCRIM Task Force. And that's a wonderful organization that has put out tons of products and tons of guidance. And it's a true public-private partnership with the Governing Council for both the IT sector as well as the Governing Council for the comms sector here in the US. And through that, we've been able to look at supply chains on multiple levels. One of the greatest things that they were able to do is put together guidance after the SolarWinds exploit to look at guidance not only for suppliers, developers, but also everyday users in terms of how they can make sure that their software supply chain is certainly more stable. CISA is definitely in the front row seat on that. We've been certainly collaborating with them and FBI to make sure that that task force stays strong and that the information sharing continues to flow through that. But they are certainly the best positioned, CISA that is, to synchronize interagency supply chain efforts across the department, and again, hopefully to build resilience in the ICTS supply chain. Last but certainly not least, I wanted to give a little shout out to our public-private partnership that we've had for almost a decade now, a little known workshop / conference that NCSC puts on. It's called the Supply Chain Technical Workshop Conference, and we started this a decade ago, back in 2014, and it just started in a small conference room. A couple of people from NCSC and a couple of people from the tech industry were like, hey, how can we get better at our technologies? And in fact, tomorrow we'll be hosting our conference with I think we have about 300 registered folks that are going to join us down at the NGA campus. Peter and Dr. Dixon is going to kick us off tomorrow with some wonderful thoughts about how we have absolutely changed in a decade to focus not only on the supply chain of these issues, but how technology can enhance our supply chain security and protections. So we're going to hear from about 20 Fortune 500 companies, think tanks, and we're going to cover a lot of technologies to include AI, cybersecurity, cyber policy, industrial controls, microelectronics, and of course, space operations. So we're going to geek out tomorrow with a lot of our technology partners and talk about supply chain for the technology space. So that's been a wonderful public-private partnership that we've had, and we can't wait to see what tomorrow will bring as well, continuing that decade of success.
Hey, thinking about all those companies gathering, one thing that industry wants to do with regarding their supply chains is to be resilient. That's how you maintain efficiency, competitiveness. You've got really great supply chains. If one part goes down, it can be resilient. And of course, they've been reaching out and making touching all the global supply chains has been part of that calculation, how you get resilience. How can you maintain resilience with some of the pressures now against China, against these other foreign adversaries, or how can you maintain your competitiveness and still get to some of these issues?
Yeah, that's a really great question, John, and I do not envy being in industry right now. The U.S. government is a Fortune 0 company, so we don't have to worry about shareholders and things of that nature, but we do have an appreciation for the pressures that one has to be to continue to maintain a market share, to continue to deliver for your customers, to deliver for your shareholders, but it is definitely something that the pressure has been on from our foreign adversaries, leveraging supply chain vulnerabilities to their advantage. So I think that's why we came back to how do we make sure that folks understand, we may call it something different in the government, but it's really boiled down to those 3 security disciplines that we could look at. From an acquisition perspective, we're really looking at how people understand how the contracts are made. When you're bringing someone into your contractual relationship, you're bringing them into your supply chain. And unbeknownst to you, you may also be bringing in what the decisions that they've made in terms of how they protect their data, how they train their employees from an enterprise level perspective. How are they looking at it from a cybersecurity breach? Are they able to notify you if something happens on their data and they've somehow suffered some sort of cyber breach? Are you the first one that they're calling, or are they calling, someone else trying to say, hey, let's not say that? And the cascading effects of that, all of that can be outlined in your contractual terms. challenging, yes. And again, as a recovering attorney, I know some of the contract terms are a little hard to get through, but that is part of the negotiation. And it is something that you can use to insulate yourself with regards to some of those protections and maintaining your resiliency, and more importantly, being able to pivot when that supplier or vendor isn't available. And so that's one of the areas that you really want to make sure that you do have some security built into your contracts, that you get, right of first refusal, for example, if some commodity does become more scarce than normal. We remember those pandemic days when some of the things were just flying off the shelves and you couldn't get PPE, for example, for some of our healthcare industry workers. So those acquisition security tools are certainly one of the first steps in making sure that the suppliers and vendors that you're operating with understand your needs and can maintain your resilience. The other cybersecurity aspects that we also want to make sure is that you're prioritizing those critical systems and networks internally. Where are those areas where you cannot have this system fail? That needs to be a high priority, and that needs to be known across your organization so that everyone understands we're putting it all in to make sure that this particular system doesn't fail. This network is connected to this particular database has this information that's absolutely critical for us to survive. It needs to be priority one when we're talking about creating backups, when we're talking about making sure that we have off-prem access to that specific data. There's also employing different tools on systems. Can you continuously monitoring every system? Probably not. But where are those areas that you're most vulnerable, and being able to determine that as an enterprise? And then finally, on the enterprise security thing, a lot of folks are, still trying to figure out what does that really mean with regards to being secure. And that means that your supply chain is part of your enterprise. If you don't have access to raw materials, if you don't have access to networks, if you have not had an opportunity to share that risk with your supply chain folks that manage that for you on a daily basis, then you're not going to be able to understand the enterprise risk that you're taking every single day. And again, that gets back to that, being an industry company, U.S. government, we deal with that every day in terms of our mission and making sure that if something goes offline, we can quickly and resilient continue to operate, to make sure that we are providing national security, defense security, homeland security for the nation. And those are those areas where I think from an enterprise perspective, everyone needs to have across the board communication. And that's where you bring everything to the table and make a decision with regards to what's going to work for your enterprise. That also includes your employment, that includes training, that includes insider threat programs and wellness programs for your employees. If they're seeing something that just doesn't make sense, they need to say something. If they're the ones that are monitoring that contract that was, entered into a few months ago, is the vendor, is the supplier delivering on what he or she said that they would? That's part of that enterprise risk management system. And I believe those are the things that are going to raise the flag. And those are the things that those organizations are going to be able to get ahead of, especially when they're trying to maintain resiliency in light of a cyber attack. I mean, it's not if, but when that happens, who's going to be able to move through, and as we like to say, thrive through those threats.
Okay. Hey, we've got a lot of audience questions. I'm going to get to those, but first, before we get to that, I want to ask you about your thoughts on China. So, there's a lot of concern that we have strategic competition with China. It's, Taiwan, cybersecurity, South China Sea. Take all of that, couple it with, the reliance on Chinese manufacturing. And there's a real concern about supply chain disruptions and what that could do. So yeah, this has been talked about for years now. What's your view on the threat where we are today, and what are the steps you see that we need to take to mitigate the threat?
Yeah, no, it's an absolutely great question, and we just have to look at some of the ATA conversations and the ATA testimony that both Director Haynes as well as the testimony from FBI Ray, seeing just how prolific China has been with regards to some of our industries, and especially taking over and monopolizing critical supply chains. Again, as I believe the director said in the ATA, China will continue to expand its global intelligence posture to advance the CCP's ambitions, challenge U.S. national security and global influence, quell perceived regime threats worldwide, and steal trade secrets and IP to bolster China's indigenous S&T sectors. I mean, that was 2024. China told us that in 2015 with regards to their military civil fusion strategy. So this is where we have to take a look at this every single day. What are those things that you're doing to maintain your resilience? One of the things I think we do have that is something that's extraordinarily strong is our industry, and the fact that China teeters between number 1, number 2, or number 3, given the day, in terms of being trade partners with the US. So they recognize that we have a tremendous trade opportunity here, that sometimes they do not want to do anything that would lessen that particular trade market and space. But how do we do so where that competition isn't going to overwhelm our industry, and that the things that we are trying to protect remain protected? And I think that's where we have to come back in and provide industry with as much information as we can, especially those in our sector, critical infrastructure sectors. Those lifeline sectors are the most critical. And I think that's when it's very shocking to hear, FBI, commentary, and even Director Easterly over at CISA say that, the PRC cyber threat is absolutely real. They are here in critical infrastructure sectors, to include some of our lifeline sectors. What are they doing there? What kind of impact will that have to our industries, to our ability to maintain our position and defend our nation? And I think that's where those security principles from a supply chain perspective really come into forefront here, where everyone needs to really level up and make sure that they are securing those supply chains. Again, we're trying to, as much as we possibly can, share supply chain threat information. And I think that's where Director Ray came in to say, don't look for just your traditional intelligence operators. There are non-traditional operators that are out there. They're trying to recruit human sources to target our businesses, insiders to steal the same kinds of innovation that they're trying to meet, to steal the data and the IP that their hackers are targeting. And they're still trying to engage in legitimate corporate deception. Procuring and investing, all of those things are legitimate apparatuses that could be considered cover for the Chinese and the PRC ultimate ambition to steal IP and to make sure that they are hiding their hand in what would be seemingly legitimate transactions from a procurement perspective, investment perspective, from joint ventures and other critical investments, to really try to do the same to get after that. So again, those lifeline sectors would probably be the most critical. So technologies and industries within those those sectors would be the ones that I would focus on specifically. But again, sharing that supply chain threat information and making sure that those owners and operators who are owning 80% of our critical infrastructure are well informed to make sure that they are faced with an exploit or a vulnerability, that they can protect themselves and by extension protect us.
Hey, let's get to some, thanks for that. And let's get to some audience questions. The first one is from Jason Eister with Chainalysis, and he asked, are you exploring any new technologies such as blockchains or smart contracts to enhance visibility and transparency in the supply chain?
Oh, great question, Jason. Thanks for joining us this morning. Yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that we are looking at right now is indeed some AI tools with regards to the amount of data that is out there to help our analysts pinpoint better supply chain links and supply chain analysis that we can certainly bring into the fold. If an AI algorithm can pinpoint, 2 or 3 suppliers that have connections to prohibited sources or prohibited entities and sanctioned individuals within a matter of minutes, that's great, because then that analyst can then forward that information on make sure that we have that information together and devise and spend more of their time on a mitigation plan, on a mitigation strategy. So I think that AI, proper use of AI, and again, looking at those algorithms, there's a ton of data and science behind that. I know that INSA just put out some guidance with regards to use of AI tools and use of AI frameworks. I think that just came out last week. And it also piggybacks on NIST standards with regards to developing AI. So any technology that you're using, and especially something as pervasive as an AI algorithm can be, you want to make sure that it's being developed and it's based upon those principles that NIST has put out and the guidance that NSA just put out a couple of weeks ago as well. So AI would probably be one of the top technologies I would say that would help us in the supply chain community to get after some of those data points and illuminate some of those connections that we wouldn't know were there, but for making sure that we had an algorithm that was pinpointing those for us. But great question.
Great. Hey, here's an infrastructure question for you from Hector Falcon, who's with the Space ISAC. Hector asked, have you seen shifts in supply chains with regards to ground and space infrastructure as it relates to the space industry?
It's a great question, Hector, and yes, space certainly has been on the radar screen of our adversary. They are certainly trying to be as competitive as possible when it comes to the space industry. In fact, NCSC has on its website a little flyer of information with regards to protecting space industry and making sure that our competition and our competitive edge in space remains so. So yes, we've certainly seen space technologies and information become a critical area for us to protect, because once it's up there, you can't get it back down. Right, so we want to make sure that anything that is going into build that space defense measure is reliable, that it is certainly something that we can count on, and that there is an opportunity for us to maintain our technological edge in the space industry. But no, great question. I would I encourage you to take a look at our website, where we've been able to pull some additional talking points as well as best practices for space industry.
Great. Hey, here's a question from Ryan Driska, who asks, how will NCSC posture for conducting supply chain risk management work at the unclassified level to keep up with the explosion of commercial data, publicly available data that's out there? What are you doing to address all that at the unclassified level?
Yeah, no, great question. And yes, there has been an absolute explosion of data that we certainly want to make sure we're taking advantage of to protect the IC supply chains as well as the federal acquisition community supply chains. So on the low side, as you can see on our website, again, we have promulgated our directive. It's called an Intelligence Community Directive 731. It is posted out there. That is the supply chain risk management framework that we have been using for, again, about a decade. It's amazing. Director Clapper signed that out in 2013 to make sure that the intelligence community had an understanding of what type of products, services, and supply chains that we had coming in to support our critical missions here in the IC. And in that decade, it has just absolutely exploded. One of the other areas that we've been tightly close with, and that particular directive is based upon NIST standards 800-161 and including the update to 800-161, and how that is framing out not only as a supply chain risk management framework, but a cyber supply chain risk management framework, and introducing those particular aspects into anyone's risk framework in terms of the information and the data. So those are the areas that we use, and the information that we use will be racked and stacked to consider from a criticality perspective. First of all, what is critical, what has to be fixed, and what is fatal, what has to be fixed in that criticality assessment. Then we move to what are the threats to that particular supply chain or the use of that item, the vulnerabilities, what is that vulnerability in our system that if exploited, we wouldn't be able to complete our mission. And then finally, our likelihood analysis. what is the likelihood that that particular exploit would make sure that our supply chain was somehow compromised? And so that's where I think using the information along those sets is how we divide the information that's available and that's out there for the supply chains that we know that we have to rely upon every day. But that information isn't just for, the intelligence community. So I believe it was in 2020, Congress gave the D&I some homework to develop a task force so that that information that we have from a supply chain risk, a CI risk, or a cybersecurity risk is properly shared with the federal acquisition community. And we've done some great strides here in the community to make sure that we are fortifying that supply chain of information to the federal acquisition community so they can also include that in their own risk management apparatus and then their own risk management processes for making better risk decisions at the federal acquisition level as well.
Great. Hey, we have a question here from Cindy Janis. Cindy asked, can you speak at all to any coordination with our international partners on resiliency? And she asked about resiliency of critical mineral supply chains, but really it's supply chains at large. What are we doing with our collaboration with allies to build resilient supply chains, period. But also she asked about the critical mineral piece.
Yeah, no, absolutely great question. And that Five Eyes and nearshore projects and supply chain aspects are certainly critical to maintaining resiliency. I know we talked about the CHIPS Act, and the CHIPS Act is certainly a great opportunity to rebuild manufacturing. But what are we doing here in the meantime? Because those factories aren't going to get built tomorrow. They're going to be here in a decade's time, perhaps. But that's where we certainly want to make sure we are leveraging those relationships, not only with our Five Eyes partners, but with our other partners across the globe to make sure that those supply chains that we need are there and available when we need them. Critical minerals, for example, is certainly something that we've tried to explore. I know State Department as well as Treasury and Commerce Department have looked at nearshoring here within Latin America, here within North America with our Canadian friends as well, trying to figure out what those things are looking like and bringing that into the calculus when we're saying we need to make sure the supply chains are more resilient. And those are conversations that I know are certainly ongoing and will continue to go as we are trying to build that resiliency, not just within one supply chain, but within others too. Critical minerals is certainly one where we have seen that China, again, has dominated not only the minerals within its own area, but also in other parts of the world, to include Africa. But more importantly than just the mineral itself, China has dominated in the processing of these minerals and bringing those minerals into a processing supply chain where it can be used within the semiconductor supply chain. It can be used in the electronic vehicle supply chain and other batteries and long-term batteries. How are we going to be able to mimic that with regards to our friends and allies? And we certainly have some relationships here within the Americas, but also with our Five Eyes partners across the globe. So those are things that we are certainly looking at in conjunction with our partners at Treasury, as well as State Department and Commerce Department.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, then I'll let you give any closing thoughts. And this is from Lorenzo Chance at NASA. And he works there as a special security officer, and he asked, what roles and responsibilities of security professionals are likely to increase as it relates to SCRM?
Great question, great question. And yeah, I totally believe that security professionals, those are our unsung heroes right now. And we really need to make sure that they are trained and they understand the aspects of their remit from a security apparatus. You might just be someone who's, a traditional physical security person. They're going to have to increase that knowledge base, and we're going to have to help those folks to get better familiar with cybersecurity, as well as acquisition security and other enterprise security apparatus as well. But all of those security disciplines come together to bring an enterprise level security apparatus to protect organizations across the board. As I always said, we started with guns, gates, and guards, right? Your traditional physical protection of crown jewels. And then when we also bring in folks folks from the inside, when they're behind the fence, we have insider threat programs to make sure that continues to be a value add relationship. But then also looking at the supply chain and cybersecurity aspects of that. When you introduce someone into your ecosystem, you're bringing with them the risk and threats that they bring in together. And I think our security professionals across the board could benefit from understanding the difference in those security disciplines and how those cyber is going to impact all of those security disciplines in the next 10 to 15 years, if it hasn't already. So it's definitely one of those areas that I think is going to explode to ensure that we maintain that resiliency, but then also to make sure that we are able to protect those organizations and those people that are doing the missions that we need them to do.
Well, Jeanette, we've reached the close of our program. Do you have any last thoughts for us?
Oh, well, no, again, John, thank you so much for the opportunity. I think this has just been absolutely wonderful. And I know it seems daunting, but we are definitely headed in the right direction with regards to supply chains. As our director here, our current director, Mike Casey, has always said, while these incidents have increased in number and severity, so has our resolve to build resilience in the supply chains we rely upon. So with that, I will leave it there, because that is exactly what we're doing here, and the ability to raise awareness with INSA and everyone who joined today is an absolute testament to how we're getting better and how we're going to continue to maintain resiliency in supply chains.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us this morning, Jeanette, and for all of your insights. It's a great discussion. And I also want to thank Moody's for sponsoring this program today. And to everyone who joined us online, thanks for taking time out of your morning. When the webinar ends, we'll have a short survey that pops up. Please take a few moments to complete it. Let us know how we did. Also looking ahead, next week on May 1st, we will host Greg Rickman, DIA's Deputy Director for Global Integration. And then later in the month, on May the 16th, we will host a TS SITK classified level discussion on space-based ISR, confronting the China challenge. Check out our website for the full program lineup for that program. And then we also are really pleased this year for the annual William Oliver Baker Award Gala. We'll be honoring retired General Paul Nakasone. We expect more than 700 leaders from across the intelligence, defense, national security communities to join us as we celebrate his work at NSA and US Cyber Command. By the way, that black tie dinner takes place on Saturday, June the 1st, down in Washington, DC at the Omni Showroom. We hope you'll be able to join us. Later this summer, we will have the 11th AFCEA and INSA Intelligence and National Security Summit. Registration is now open for this program, and it runs August 27th, 28th. It really is the nation's premier event for an unclassified dialogue between the IC and national security agencies and their industry and academic partners. We already have confirmed participation from new DIA Director, General Cruz, NGA Director, Admiral Whitworth, and NRO Director, Chris Scalise. You can see about all of these programs and the agenda online at intelsummit.org. And last, I want to let everyone know the INSA Foundation is currently accepting applications for its 2024 scholarship program. We're going to award 8 scholarships valued at $60,000 this year for both undergraduate and master's students who are pursuing careers in intelligence and national security. It's a great opportunity. The deadline is at the end of May, Friday, May the 31st. Please share this opportunity with your colleagues, with your friends, with your college-age children, with the college-age children of your colleagues and friends. It's a great opportunity, and we hope to get lots of applications to review. This concludes this morning's program. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.